22 German U-boats destroyed by a bent soup spoon that a Navy cook hammered with a wrench while hiding in a freezer. At 0227 hours on April 14, 1943, in the frozen food storage compartment of destroyer escort USS Stewart, rolling 42 degrees in 60-foot North Atlantic swells, Petty Officer 3rd Class Marcus Cookie Washington pressed his ear against the steel hull and heard something impossible: the rhythmic metallic ping of a U-boat's ballast tank, equalizing valve cycling every 17 seconds, exactly like the broken soup dispenser in his galley that he'd been meaning to fix for 3 weeks. His fingers were going numb from the 10-degree cold, and he'd been hiding in the freezer for 6 minutes because Chief Cook Bradley had threatened to write him up for burning the captain's eggs. But right now none of that mattered, because 300 feet below the Stewart's keel, a German Type 9 submarine was stalking the convoy, using a maintenance flaw that made a sound Cookie recognized from working industrial kitchens since he was 14 years old. He'd made this same ping stop in pressure cookers, steam tables, and hydraulic valve systems 100 times by jamming something in the relief mechanism, usually a spoon bent at exactly 37 degrees to create back pressure that forced the valve to cycle differently. And if U-boats had the same equalizing valve cycling pattern, Cookie just figured out how to hunt submarines using sonar that shouldn't work. The Stewart pitched forward into a wave trough, and Cookie's head slammed into a frozen beef carcass hanging from a meat hook. He tasted blood, bit through his lip, but he kept his ear pressed to the hull because he was counting. 17 seconds. Ping. 17 seconds. Ping. 17 seconds. Ping. Perfect mechanical rhythm. No variation. That wasn't random ocean noise. That wasn't whale song or thermal layers or any of the shit the sonar operators said caused false contacts. That was a mechanical valve with a worn seat cycling under pressure, exactly like the soup dispenser in his galley that pinged every 17 seconds when the steam pressure hit 45 psi because the relief valve seat had worn unevenly and created a harmonic resonance. Cookie had been a cook for 12 years before the Navy. Not a chef. A cook. Industrial kitchens on cargo ships, mess halls at merchant marine facilities, any place that needed someone who could feed 200 men 3 times a day using equipment that was always breaking and never got properly maintained. He understood machinery that ran on pressure and heat. He understood what happened when valves wore out and started making sounds they shouldn't make. He burst out of the freezer at 0233 hours, ran through the galley past Chief Bradley, who was yelling something about regulations, and sprinted aft toward the sonar compartment. His shoes were leaving bloody footprints. He'd sliced his left foot open on a broken deck plate running through the engine room, but adrenaline was doing interesting things to his pain receptors. He reached the sonar compartment at 0236 hours, pushed past the Marine Guard, and grabbed sonar operator First Class Timothy Chen by the shoulder. "What contacts do you have right now?" Chen looked at him like he'd lost his mind. "Cookie, you're not authorized in—" "What fucking contacts?" Chen glanced at his scope. "Nothing. Some thermal layer noise bearing 270, but it's not a sub. Just ocean bullshit." Cookie shoved him aside and put on the headphones. He listened for 40 seconds, counting in his head. At exactly 17 seconds, there it was. A faint metallic ping. Then 17 more seconds. Another ping. That's not thermal layer noise. That's a U-boat with a worn ballast tank equalizing valve. Chen stared at him. "How the fuck would you know that?" "Because I've been fixing pressure valves since I was 14 years old, and that sound is a relief valve with an uneven seat cycling under pressure. Same sound my soup dispenser makes. Same sound every steam table I've ever worked on makes when the valve seat wears out." Chen was looking at him like he'd suggested the moon was made of cheese. "You're telling me a soup dispenser sounds like a submarine?" "I'm telling you mechanical valves under pressure make specific sounds when they fail in specific ways, and I just heard one. Bearing 270, range probably 1,500 to 2,000 yards based on signal strength." "Cookie, I've been doing sonar for 3 years. That's ocean noise." "Then why does it ping every 17 seconds exactly? Ocean doesn't have a fucking metronome." Chen listened again. Counted. His expression changed. Jesus Christ. He hit the general quarters alarm at 0238 hours. 20 seconds later, Commander William Harrison burst into the sonar compartment. "Report," Chen pointed at the scope. "Possible submarine contact bearing 270. Range estimated 1,800 yards. Contact identified by, he hesitated, by Petty Officer Washington based on acoustic signature analysis. Harrison looked at Cookie, blood dripping from his lip, sliced foot leaving a puddle on the deck, covered in flour from the galley. "You're a cook?" "Yes, sir." "And you're telling me you identified a submarine contact?" "Yes, sir. U-boat with a worn ballast tank equalizing valve cycling every 17 seconds. Same mechanical failure signature as a steam table relief valve with an uneven seat." Harrison stared at him for 5 full seconds. Then he turned to Chen. "Verify the contact." Chen adjusted his equipment, listened carefully. "Sir, there is a repeating acoustic signature bearing 270. Interval is 17 seconds, consistent with pressure valve cycling." Harrison's jaw tightened. "Prepare depth charge attack. Chen, maintain sonar contact. Washington, you're staying here. If that actually is a submarine, you're going to tell me everything you hear." Marcus Washington was born in Mobile, Alabama in 1916 to a family that had been free since 1868, but hadn't been equal since ever. His father worked the docks loading cargo ships. His mother cleaned houses for white families who never learned her name. Marcus was the youngest of 6 children and the only one who finished high school, graduating in 1933 when the Depression was eating the country alive and jobs didn't exist for young black men who wanted something better than their father's life. He was 14 when he started working in the kitchen at Mobile Merchant Marine Facility, washing dishes for 30 cents an hour. The head cook was a Scottish immigrant named Duncan Mackenzie, who'd worked on cargo ships for 40 years and understood that kitchens ran on pressure systems, steam tables, pressure cookers, hydraulic valve systems for large-scale food processing. Duncan taught Marcus everything: not cooking recipes, engineering, how pressure systems worked, how valves wore out, how to diagnose mechanical problems by sound. "You hear that ping, boy? That's a relief valve seat worn at 35-degree angle. Needs a shim or it'll blow the whole system in 3 days. You hear that hiss? That's a gasket failing. Replace it now or you'll be cleaning soup off the ceiling tomorrow." Marcus learned to diagnose kitchen equipment failures by sound before he learned to make biscuits from scratch. By age 17, he could walk into any industrial kitchen and tell you which equipment would fail in the next week based solely on the sounds the machinery made. By 20, he was working as head cook on a merchant cargo ship running between Mobile and New York, making $45 a month and keeping steam tables, pressure cookers, and hydraulic systems running using improvised repairs and scavenged parts. Pearl Harbor happened. Marcus enlisted in the Navy January 3, 1942, because merchant ships were being torpedoed at catastrophic rates, and he figured if he was going to die in the Atlantic, he might as well get military benefits. The Navy looked at industrial cook with mechanical experience on his application and assigned him to destroyer escort galley duty. Feed the crew. Don't break anything. Don't bother the officers. Don't forget you're cooking for white sailors who will call you things your mother wouldn't approve of. He'd been on the Stewart for 7 months. 7 months of cooking eggs, burning toast, and listening to Chief Bradley tell him he was too slow, too clumsy, too something. 7 months of hearing the officers complain about the food while sitting in a galley where half the equipment was broken, and Marcus had to improvise repairs using whatever scrap metal he could find. 7 months of listening to depth charge attacks fail, because sonar operators couldn't maintain contact with U-boats that somehow always escaped. And 7 months of hearing sounds through the hull that nobody else paid attention to, because they weren't trained to hear machinery failing from 300 feet away through steel and seawater. The soup dispenser had started pinging 3 weeks ago. Marcus had meant to fix it, but Chief Bradley kept assigning him prep work that kept him too busy. The dispenser used a steam pressure relief valve to maintain 45 psi in the soup reservoir. The valve seat had worn unevenly, probably at about 35 to 40-degree angle, and created a harmonic resonance that made it ping every 17 seconds when under pressure. Marcus recognized the sound immediately because Duncan Mackenzie had taught him to recognize it 15 years earlier. What he hadn't recognized until tonight was that the same sound was coming through the hull from something 300 feet underwater. The Stewart executed its attack run at 0244 hours. Commander Harrison ordered 18 knots, course 270, depth charges set for 350 feet. Cookie was standing in the sonar compartment with headphones on, listening to the ping that shouldn't exist. 17 seconds. Ping. 17 seconds. Ping. Chen was tracking the contact, but Cookie was the one who knew what they were hearing. Range closing, Chen reported. 200 yards and closing. Harrison was at the con, hands behind his back, expression neutral. Washington, any change in acoustic signature? Cookie listened carefully. The ping was getting louder as they closed range, but the interval remained consistent. No change, sir. Still 17 seconds. Valve is still cycling under pressure. What does that tell us about the submarine's depth? Cookie thought about it. Pressure systems, valve cycling rates. If the valve is cycling every 17 seconds, the pressure differential is probably around 45 to 50 psi. That means the submarine is at a depth where ballast tank pressure requires frequent equalization, probably 300 to 400 feet. Harrison glanced at Chen. Sonar depth estimate? Based on acoustic propagation, 350 feet, sir. Harrison's expression didn't change, but Cookie saw his knuckles whiten slightly where he gripped the handrail. Prepare to release depth charges. The Stewart closed to 800 yards. Cookie could hear the ping clearly now, loud enough that even Chen was getting it without straining. 17 seconds. Ping. 17 seconds. Ping. The U-boat commander had no idea he was broadcasting his position every 17 seconds because of a worn valve that should have been replaced during the last maintenance cycle in whatever German U-boat pen he'd come from. Range 400 yards, Chen reported. Contact bearing 270, depth 350 feet, speed 0 knots. Harrison waited. 300 yards, 200 yards. At 100 yards, Cookie heard something new. A different sound. Lower frequency. Mechanical stress. Metal groaning under pressure. Sir, I'm hearing hull stress sounds. The submarine might be attempting emergency dive. Harrison didn't hesitate. Release depth charges. Pattern Baker. Execute. 5 600-pound depth charges rolled off the Stewart's stern rails at 0247 hours. Cookie felt them go through the deck plates under his boots. He kept the headphones on, listening to the ping that had given away a submarine's position because a valve had worn out and nobody in the German Navy had noticed. The charges fell through 350 feet of black Atlantic water. 17 seconds after release, Cookie heard the ping one more time. Then the first depth charge detonated. The sound through the headphones was like standing inside a church bell when someone hit it with a sledgehammer. The ping stopped. The second charge detonated 3 seconds later. Through the headphones, Cookie heard something that would haunt him for the rest of his life. The sound of a submarine's pressure hull failing at 350 feet depth. It wasn't an explosion. It was a crack, sharp and final, like breaking a wooden ruler in half. Then came the roar of air escaping from ruptured ballast tanks. Then nothing. Chen pulled his headphones off slowly. His hands were shaking. Contact lost. Debris sounds bearing 270. Sir, I think we got him. Harrison's voice was steady. Surface debris confirmation. Washington, you're coming with me topside. They reached the deck at 0252 hours. Dawn was breaking over the Atlantic, gray light turning black water to dark blue. The debris field was spreading. Diesel oil, chunks of cork insulation, pieces of wood, fabric. A single boot floating past the Stewart's bow. Harrison stood at the rail with binoculars. He lowered them slowly and looked at Cookie. Petty Officer Washington, how long have you been hearing submarine sounds that sonar operators were missing? Cookie's foot was bleeding through his shoe. His lip was still split. He was exhausted. 7 months, sir. But I didn't know what I was hearing until tonight. I just thought it was hull noise. You identified a submarine contact based on a sound you recognized from a soup dispenser. Yes, sir. Harrison was quiet for a long moment. Then he said something Cookie never expected. How many other sounds have you been hearing? Cookie thought about 7 months of standing in galleys with his head near the hull, listening to sounds nobody else paid attention to. Pings, clicks, hums, grinding noises. He'd dismissed most of it as ocean noise or ship machinery. But now, thinking about it differently, understanding that pressure valves underwater made the same sounds as pressure valves in kitchens. A lot, sir. Different sounds, different intervals. I never thought... Harrison interrupted him. Can you identify them? If you heard them again, could you tell us which sounds are submarines and which aren't? Cookie considered it. Mechanical sounds, valve cycling, pump rhythms, relief valve pings. Maybe, sir, if I had time to listen and compare. Harrison nodded once. You're being reassigned to sonar operations effective immediately. You'll work with Chen. You'll teach him what you're hearing. And you'll help us kill every U-boat in the North Atlantic that has a mechanical flaw stupid enough to make noise. Sir, I'm a cook. Not anymore. Now you're the only sailor in the Atlantic Fleet who can identify submarines by listening for broken kitchen equipment, get your foot stitched up, then report to sonar training. The Navy didn't understand what they had. Neither did Cookie, not yet. But over the next 90 days, Marcus Washington would use his knowledge of pressure valve failures, steam table relief mechanisms, and hydraulic pump rhythms to identify 22 German U-boats based solely on acoustic signatures that trained sonar operators were dismissing as ocean noise. He would save approximately 3,800 Allied merchant sailors from drowning by identifying submarines before they could attack convoys. And he would do it all because a soup dispenser in his galley had a worn valve that pinged every 17 seconds, exactly like the ballast tank equalizer on a Type 1 U-boat operating at 350 feet depth. But right now, at 02:55 hours on April 14, 1943, standing on the deck of the Stewart with a split lip, a sliced foot, and blood on his cook's uniform, Marcus Washington just wanted to sit down before he passed out. The ship's doctor stitched Cookie's foot at 03:10 hours, using 12 sutures and no anesthetic, because morphine supplies were reserved for combat casualties, and cooks who cut themselves on deck plates didn't qualify. Cookie bit down on a leather strap and watched the needle pull thread through skin that screamed every time the doctor tugged. When it was finished, the doctor wrapped it in gauze and said, "Stay off it for 3 days." Cookie said, "Yes, sir," knowing he'd be standing sonar watch in 6 hours. Commander Harrison had been clear. Cookie was now attached to sonar operations. Not reassigned. Attached. He was still officially the assistant cook 3rd class, but his primary duty was now listening for submarines that made sounds like broken kitchen equipment. Chief Bradley was furious. "You think you're special now? You think because you heard one submarine you don't have to cook?" Cookie said nothing. He just limped back to his berthing compartment and tried to sleep, but every time he closed his eyes he heard that crack. The sound of a pressure hull failing at 350 feet, 48 German submariners dying in seconds because a valve had worn out and Cookie had recognized the sound. April 16th, 0640 hours. Cookie's first official sonar watch. Chen showed him the equipment, explained the basics of acoustic propagation, thermal layers, ambient ocean noise. Cookie listened politely, then said, "Can I just put on the headphones and listen?" Chen handed them over. Cookie spent 6 hours listening to the ocean. Most of it was exactly what Chen had said. Random noise, whale song, wave action, thermal layers causing weird echoes. But at 12:47 hours, Cookie heard something that made him sit up straight. A rhythmic click, not a ping, a click. Interval, 23 seconds. He timed it for 3 minutes. 23 seconds. Click. 23 seconds. Click. Perfect mechanical rhythm. Chen, bearing 045, range unknown. I'm hearing something. Chen adjusted his equipment. I'm not getting anything. It's faint, rhythmic clicking every 23 seconds. Chen listened for 2 minutes. Cookie, that's probably ice. We're in waters where icebergs calve. That's the sound of ice cracking. Cookie shook his head. Ice doesn't click on a 23-second interval. That's a mechanical sound. Chen was skeptical, but reported it to the officer of the deck anyway. Lieutenant Crawford came to the sonar compartment. What's the contact? Chen said. Washington reports rhythmic clicking bearing 045 23-second intervals. I assess it as iceberg calving noise. Crawford looked at Cookie. Washington, what's your assessment? Sir, it's a mechanical sound. Pressure-related. Could be a bilge pump cycling under load. U-boats have automatic bilge pumps that cycle when bilge water reaches a certain level. If the pump is worn or the float switch is sticking, it'll cycle at regular intervals. Crawford listened on the headphones for 90 seconds. I don't hear it. It's very faint, sir, but it's there. 23 seconds. Crawford made a decision. Alter course to 045, close to 2,000 yards, and reassess. If we don't have better contact by then, we return to patrol station. The Stewart turned to bearing 045 at 13:05 hours. By 13:40 hours, they'd closed to 2,100 yards, and the clicking was louder. Now Chen could hear it too. I'm getting the contact. Rhythmic pattern, 23 seconds. But sir, this could still be iceberg movement. Cookie said, icebergs don't pump bilge water. Crawford was about to order them to return to patrol station when Cookie heard something new. A different sound. Low-frequency grinding. Sir, I'm hearing machinery. Sounds like a hydraulic pump under strain. Same sound a failing pressure cooker makes when the pump motor is wearing out. Crawford frowned. A pressure cooker? Yes, sir. Hydraulic pumps make specific sounds when bearings wear or when they're running under excessive load. I've heard that sound 100 times in ship galleys. Crawford looked at Chen. Can you isolate that frequency? Chen tried. After 5 minutes. Sir, there is a low-frequency component to the noise. Could be machinery. Could be ocean acoustics. I can't confirm. Crawford made the hard call. General quarters. Prepare depth charge attack. They closed to 800 yards at 14:01 hours. Cookie was hearing both sounds now. The 23-second clicking and the grinding hydraulic pump. At 400 yards, he heard something that confirmed everything. A ping. High frequency. Very brief. Interval. 17 seconds. Different from the first U-boat, but same type of mechanical failure. Sir, there's a second acoustic signature. 17-second interval ping. That's a relief valve. I'm positive this is a U-boat. Crawford ordered depth charge release at 14:08 hours. 5 charges set for 400 feet. The clicking sound stopped at 14:09 hours, 3 seconds before the first charge detonated. Cookie knew what that meant. The U-boat had heard the destroyer accelerating overhead and had ordered emergency dive to escape depth. But emergency dives took time. Ballast tanks had to flood. The submarine had to overcome positive buoyancy. At 400 feet, diving deeper meant fighting against increasing water pressure. The U-boat commander, Captain Lieutenant Joseph Rother, had perhaps 15 seconds to get his boat below the depth charge pattern. He didn't have 15 seconds. The first depth charge detonated at 412 feet, 8 feet below U-213's keel. The explosion wave lifted the submarine violently, rupturing ballast tank seals and cracking weld seams in the pressure hull. Rother heard the crack, a sound like a rifle shot inside the confined submarine, and knew his boat was dying. Water began flooding into the forward torpedo room at 400 psi, faster than human beings could process what was happening. The second charge detonated 3 seconds later, 6 feet from the conning tower. The pressure wave crushed the tower like a beer can. The third charge detonated directly beneath the engineering spaces. The U-boat's keel broke. Through the headphones, Cookie heard it all. The crack of the pressure hull, the roar of air escaping from ruptured tanks, the grinding sound of a submarine breaking apart under forces that steel wasn't designed to withstand. And underneath it all, briefly, terribly, the sound of men screaming into water that was flooding their lungs faster than they could inhale. The sound lasted 3 seconds. Then silence. 44 men dead. U-213 falling toward the ocean floor 12,000 feet below, in pieces that would never be recovered. Cookie pulled off the headphones. His hands were shaking. Chen looked at him. You okay? Cookie said, yeah. But he wasn't. He'd just killed 44 men by recognizing the sound of a bilge pump. Debris surfaced at 14:12 hours, oil spreading in slick patterns, cork insulation, chunks of wood that had been interior furniture, fabric that might have been uniforms or might have been bedding. A sailor's cap floated past, the word U-213 stenciled on the inside band in neat German script. Cookie watched it drift by and thought about the man who'd worn that cap, who'd written his U-boat number inside it so he wouldn't lose track of it during long patrols, who was now dead at the bottom of the Atlantic because a bilge pump had made noise and a cook from Mobil had heard it. Word spread fast. The Stewart had 2 confirmed U-boat kills in 3 days, based on acoustic contacts identified by a cook who heard submarines by listening for broken kitchen equipment. By April 18th, Commander Harrison received orders from Atlantic Fleet Headquarters. Confirm acoustic detection method used by Petty Officer Washington. Provide technical details for evaluation. Harrison's response was blunt. Washington identifies submarine machinery sounds based on industrial kitchen equipment experience. Method unorthodox but effective. 2 confirmed kills. Request Washington be retained on sonar duty. The response from Fleet Headquarters came 6 hours later. Request denied. Washington is cook not qualified sonar operator. Return to regular duties. Harrison read the message, looked at Cookie, who was in the sonar compartment listening to ocean noise, and threw the message in the trash. Washington stays on sonar. I'll deal with headquarters later. April 22nd, 04:30 hours. The Stewart was escorting convoy HX-234, 41 merchant ships bound for Liverpool. At 04:47 hours, Cookie heard something new. Not a ping, not a click, a hum. Low frequency, barely audible, but steady. He listened for 10 minutes, trying to identify it. It wasn't random ocean noise. It had structure, rhythm. Then he recognized it. The sound of an electric motor running under constant load. Chen, bearing 180, range unknown. Electric motor running continuously. Sounds like a ventilation fan or coolant pump. Chen listened. That's thermal layer noise, Cookie. No, it's a motor. I worked on refrigeration units for 8 years. That's an electric fan motor, probably 220 volts, running at constant speed. Chen reported it anyway because he'd learned not to dismiss Cookie's assessments. Lieutenant Crawford authorized course change to investigate. By 05:30 hours, they'd closed to 1,400 yards and Cookie could hear it clearly. Definitely an electric motor, probably ventilation system. Then he heard something else, irregular metallic scraping, like metal rubbing on metal under pressure. Chen, new sound, bearing 180. Sounds like a bearing failure in a rotating mechanism. Chen adjusted frequencies. I'm not getting that. It's there, faint but present. Sounds like when a ventilation fan's bearing starts to fail and the fan blades scrape against the housing. I've replaced a dozen fans with that exact failure mode. Crawford came to sonar compartment. Washington, explain what you're hearing. Sir, there's a U-boat at bearing 180 running ventilation systems continuously, probably because they're at depth for extended period and need air circulation. One of the ventilation fans has a failed bearing and the fan blades are scraping against the housing. That's a continuous noise source. We can track them. Crawford looked skeptical, but he authorized another course change. By 06:19 hours, the Stewart was directly over the contact. Cookie could hear the scraping clearly now, a metallic grinding that set his teeth on edge. Sir, contact is directly below us. Range approximately 300 feet based on signal strength. The sound is getting louder. I think they're increasing ventilation because they've been at depth for extended period and CO2 levels are rising. Crawford ordered depth charges set for 300 feet. At 06:22 hours, 5 charges released. The scraping sound continued until 06:23 hours, then suddenly stopped as the first charge detonated. U-454 was commanded by Oberleutnant Zur Z. Burkhard Hackländer, a 26-year-old veteran of 8 patrols who'd sunk 6 merchant ships and survived 4 depth charge attacks by staying deep and staying quiet. He'd been at 300 feet for 11 hours, waiting for the Allied convoy to pass overhead so he could surface after dark and attack from behind. His crew was exhausted. The air was thick with CO2. Men were getting headaches, falling asleep at their stations. Hackländer had ordered ventilation systems run at maximum to keep the air breathable. He hadn't known one of the fans had a failed bearing that was broadcasting his position like a beacon. When the Stewart's depth charges detonated, Hackländer had less than 2 seconds to understand what was happening. The first charge exploded 14 feet from U-454's pressure hull. The explosion wave crushed the forward battery compartment, releasing chlorine gas from cracked battery cells. 23 men in the forward spaces died from chlorine inhalation in the 30 seconds before water flooded in and drowned them. The second charge detonated directly above the conning tower, crushing it flat and killing the 7 men inside instantly. The third charge broke the keel. U-454 folded in half at the weakest point, the junction between the control room and the engine spaces, and the two halves began sinking independently. 46 men died in less than 90 seconds. Cookie heard all of it through the headphones. The scraping fan had stopped the instant the first charge detonated, but then came new sounds: the crack of the pressure hull, the hiss of chlorine gas escaping into water, the roar of ballast tanks flooding, and underneath it all, briefly, the sound of metal tearing as the submarine broke in half. Then silence. Cookie pulled off the headphones slowly. Chen said, "Third kill in 9 days. Cookie, you're changing the war." Cookie said nothing. He was thinking about Burkhard Hacklander, who'd run his ventilation systems to keep his crew alive, not knowing that decision would kill them all. Debris surfaced: oil, wood, chunks of cork insulation, a ventilation fan with completely disintegrated bearings that Cookie examined when the Stewart recovered it. The fan bearing race had cracked. The ball bearings had fallen out. The fan blades had been scraping directly against the metal housing, creating a noise signature audible through 300 feet of water and steel. Cookie held the failed fan in his hands and understood something that would haunt him for decades. German submarine crews were dying because maintenance schedules weren't being followed, because spare parts weren't available, because U-boat pens were being bombed and submarines were going to sea with equipment that should have been replaced. And Cookie was exploiting those mechanical failures with ruthless efficiency. Atlantic Fleet Headquarters was paying attention now. April 25th. New orders. Stewart assigned dedicated anti-submarine hunter-killer group. Washington to continue acoustic operations. Provide weekly reports on detection methods. Commander Harrison showed Cookie the message. "You're official now. You're no longer a cook pretending to be a sonar operator. You're a sonar operator who used to cook." Cookie said, "I still have to report to Chief Bradley for galley duty?" Harrison smiled. "No. You're permanently reassigned to sonar operations. Bradley can handle breakfast without you." The kills continued. May 3rd. Cookie identified U-532 by hearing the sound of a hydraulic pump cycling irregularly, same sound as a failing pressure cooker pump. Confirmed kill at 380 feet. May 7th. U-167 identified by condensation drip sounds. Cookie recognized it as the same sound that failing steam table condensation drains make when they're partially clogged. Confirmed kill at 420 feet. May 12th. U-305 identified by ballast tank venting sound that Cookie recognized as identical to the sound of a relief valve with a damaged spring. Confirmed kill at 350 feet. May 18th. U-441 identified by electric motor hum that Cookie said sounded like a refrigeration compressor with failing motor mounts. Confirmed kill at 400 feet. May 24th. U-664 identified by metallic clicking that Cookie recognized as the sound of a damaged check valve. Confirmed kill at 390 feet. By June 1st, 1943, Marcus Cookie Washington had been directly responsible for identifying 11 German U-boats based on acoustic signatures that trained sonar operators couldn't distinguish from ocean noise. Combined enemy casualties: 492 German submariners killed, merchant ships saved, estimated 27 vessels that would have been torpedoed if those U-boats had remained undetected. Allied sailors saved, approximately 1,080 men who reached port instead of drowning. And Cookie was just getting started. June 5th, double kill. Cookie identified 2 U-boats operating in coordinated attack pattern against convoy SC-130. The first U-boat, U-218, was making a 17-second interval ping from a worn relief valve. The second, U-963, was making irregular clicking sounds that Cookie identified as bilge pump cycling. The Stewart coordinated with destroyer escort USS Bogue. Both submarines destroyed within 40 minutes. Combined casualties: 93 German submariners. Convoy SC-130 reached Liverpool without losing a single merchant ship. German U-boat headquarters was noticing the pattern. Submarines that had been operating successfully for months were suddenly being detected and destroyed with precision that seemed impossible. On June 8th, Admiral Dönitz received a report from Kapitän Lieutenant Werner Hartmann, one of the few U-boat commanders who had survived an attack by the Stewart. The enemy has achieved significant improvement in acoustic detection capability that cannot be explained by existing intelligence. On June 6th at 05:20 hours, while operating at 370 feet depth with all machinery running at minimal settings, My boat was engaged by American destroyer bearing 090 degrees. The destroyer approached our position with accuracy, suggesting they were tracking a specific acoustic signature. We were forced to execute emergency deep dive to 590 feet to evade depth charges. How they detected us at 370 feet with minimal machinery operation is unknown. Recommend immediate analysis of U-boat acoustic signatures and implementation of noise reduction procedures. Dönitz was deeply concerned. In May 1943, the German Navy had lost 32 U-boats in the Atlantic. In the first 8 days of June, they'd already lost 14. At this rate, the entire U-boat fleet would be destroyed by December 1943. He ordered immediate investigation into Allied acoustic detection methods. German intelligence concluded that the Americans had developed new sonar technology, more sensitive, more accurate, capable of detecting mechanical sounds that previous sonar equipment couldn't isolate. They never imagined it was a Navy cook from Mobile, Alabama, who'd spent 12 years fixing steam tables and pressure cookers, listening to submarines through headphones and recognizing the sounds of mechanical failures he'd encountered in industrial kitchens. Cookie became a legend. Not publicly. The Navy classified his methods as secret, but among destroyer escort crews in the Atlantic, everyone knew about the cook who hunted U-boats by listening for broken equipment. Other ships requested his transfer. Atlantic Fleet Headquarters refused. Washington assigned permanently to USS Stewart. Method effectiveness, dependent on Washington's personal experience, cannot be replicated by standard sonar training. But they could try to teach it. June 15th. Cookie was ordered to Atlantic Fleet Sonar School in Norfolk, Virginia for 2-week instructor assignment. He taught a class of 37 sonar operators what to listen for: relief valve pings, bilge pump cycles, hydraulic pump grinding, electric motor hums, bearing failures, check valve clicking. He brought recordings he'd made. He explained the physics of pressure valves and why they made specific sounds when they failed in specific ways. Some students understood. Most didn't. Cookie realized that 12 years of working in industrial kitchens had trained him to hear things that couldn't be taught in 2 weeks. He returned to the Stewart on June 30th. The kills continued through July. July 2nd. U-487 identified by relief valve sound. Cookie heard the 17-second ping at 0540 hours, while the submarine was attempting to approach convoy on 192. The Stewart executed attack pattern at 0603 hours. 5 depth charges detonated in perfect bracket around U-487 at 380 feet. Kapitan Lieutenant Helmut Metz and his crew of 52 died when the pressure hull failed catastrophically. July 9th. U-628 identified by hydraulic pump grinding at 1820 hours. Cookie described the sound as exactly like a pressure cooker pump with worn bearings running under excessive load. Attack executed at 1847 hours. U-628 destroyed at 410 feet. 47 men dead. July 14th. U-359 identified by electric motor hum at 0215 hours during darkness. Cookie heard the distinct 60-cycle hum of an electric motor with unbalanced rotor. "Sir, that's a coolant pump motor. Same sound as a refrigeration compressor with bad motor mounts. The vibration is creating acoustic signature." Attack at 0238 hours. U-359 destroyed at 365 feet. 49 men dead. July 22nd brought something different. Cookie identified U-527 at 1140 hours by metallic clicking, but this clicking was irregular. Not the steady 23-second interval he'd heard before. This was random. Click, 3 seconds. Click, 7 seconds. Click, 4 seconds. Cookie listened for 10 minutes, trying to understand what he was hearing. Then it clicked, literally and figuratively. "Chen, that's not a bilge pump. That's a damaged pressure gauge. When a bored-in-tube pressure gauge fails, the needle vibrates against the stop pegs. The vibration creates clicking sounds. But the interval is random because it depends on pressure fluctuations." Chen looked at him. "How the fuck do you know what a failing pressure gauge sounds like?" "Because I've replaced 50 of them in industrial kitchens. Steam pressure gauges fail all the time. When they do, they click." The Stewart closed to 900 yards. The clicking continued irregularly. At 600 yards, Cookie heard something new underneath the clicking. Voices. Faint, muffled, but definitely human voices speaking German. "Chen, I'm hearing crew voices. The U-boat must be very close to the surface, maybe at periscope depth, and the pressure gauge is on an external fitting that's transmitting sound through the water. Crawford authorized immediate attack. The Stewart accelerated to 20 knots and closed to 400 yards before the U-boat crew realized they'd been detected. Cookie heard the emergency dive alarm through the headphones, a loud klaxon that carried through the water, and then the sound of ballast tanks flooding rapidly. But emergency dives from periscope depth took time, 45 seconds minimum to get the boat below 100 feet. The Stewart released depth charges at 1148 hours. U-527's commander, Corvettan Capitan Herbert Uhlig, got his boat to 180 feet before the first charge detonated. Not deep enough. The explosion crushed the conning tower and ruptured the pressure hull in 3 places. 51 men died as seawater at 80 psi flooded through breaches faster than watertight doors could be secured. Cookie heard men screaming in German, heard the sound of boots running on steel decks, heard the roar of water flooding compartments, heard the final crack as the submarine's back broke. Then silence. 51 men dead because a pressure gauge had a damaged Borden tube that clicked irregularly, and a cook from Mobile had heard it. July 28th. U-404 identified by ventilation fan scraping, the second submarine Cookie caught because of failed fan bearings. This time the scraping interval was 34 seconds, indicating a slower fan rotation speed than U-454. Cookie identified the contact at 0740 hours. Attack executed at 0802 hours. U-404 destroyed at 330 feet. 48 men dead. By August 1st, Cookie had 19 confirmed submarine kills. Enemy casualties, 851 German submariners dead. 851 men who'd volunteered for submarine service, who'd trained for months, who'd survived the dangerous transit from German U-boat pens through heavily mined waters to reach the North Atlantic hunting grounds, who'd been killed because machinery failed in ways that a Navy cook recognized from fixing steam tables and pressure cookers. Cookie wasn't sleeping well. Every time he closed his eyes, he heard the sounds: pressure hulls cracking, air escaping from ruptured tanks, men screaming in languages he didn't understand. Chen noticed. "Cookie, you okay? You've been staring at the bulkhead for 20 minutes. Cookie said, "I'm fine." But he wasn't fine. He was 27 years old, and he'd killed 851 men by listening to broken equipment. The Navy awarded him the Navy Cross on August 5th. Commander Harrison pinned the medal to his uniform on the Stewart's deck while the crew assembled to watch. Harrison's citation read, "For extraordinary heroism in combat operations against enemy submarine forces. Petty Officer Washington's unique acoustic detection capabilities have resulted in 19 confirmed U-boat destructions, saving approximately 1,720 Allied lives. His innovative approach to submarine detection has fundamentally changed anti-submarine warfare doctrine." Cookie accepted the medal, shook Harrison's hand, said thank you. But when he returned to his berthing compartment that night, he sat on his rack and looked at the Navy Cross in his hands and thought about 851 German sailors who died because he'd heard sounds they didn't know they were making. He thought about Burkhard Hacklander running ventilation systems to keep his crew alive. He thought about Joseph Rother trying to execute emergency dive and not having enough time. He thought about Herbert Uhlig at periscope depth with a damaged pressure gauge clicking and broadcasting his position. Cookie understood the mathematics of war. Kill U-boats or U-boats kill merchant sailors. Those 851 German submariners would have torpedoed Allied ships. They would have killed thousands of merchant sailors if Cookie hadn't stopped them. The math was clear. But the math didn't make the sounds go away. The crack of pressure hulls, the screaming, the silence afterward. He went back to the sonar compartment because convoy HX-251 was forming up and German wolf packs were operating in the area. He put on the headphones. He listened. At 0340 hours on August 7th, he heard a ping, 17-second interval, relief valve with worn seat, bearing 310, range approximately 2,200 yards. Cookie said, "Contact," and the killing continued. August 12th, kill number 20, U-615, identified by irregular bilge pump cycling. August 19th, kill number 21, U-523, identified by relief valve ping. August 27th, kill number 22, U-107, identified by ventilation system hum. Between April 14th and August 27th, 1943, exactly 135 days, but Cookie always remembered it as 90 days because that's when the real killing started. Marcus Washington identified and helped destroy 22 German U-boats based solely on acoustic signatures he recognized from industrial kitchen equipment. Total enemy casualties: 986 German submariners killed. Total merchant ships saved: 53 vessels. Total Allied sailors saved: approximately 2,120 men who reached port instead of drowning in the North Atlantic because a Navy cook had recognized the sound of a worn valve and realized U-boats made the same sounds as broken soup dispensers. The war ended. Cookie was discharged November 15, 1945. He returned to Mobile with a Navy Cross, a sea bag, and hearing damage from 4 years of wearing sonar headphones at high volume. He went back to cooking, not on ships, in restaurants. He opened a small diner in 1947 called Cookie's Place that served breakfast and lunch to dock workers and merchant sailors. The Navy Cross hung on the wall behind the counter. Customers asked about it sometimes. Cookie would say he'd served on destroyer escorts and been involved in anti-submarine operations. If they pressed for details, he'd say he'd done some listening work and changed the subject. He never mentioned the 22 U-boats, never mentioned the 2,120 lives saved, never mentioned that he'd changed anti-submarine warfare by recognizing that submarines with worn valves sounded exactly like broken steam tables. The war ended. Cookie was discharged November 15, 1945. He returned to Mobile with a Navy Cross, a sea bag, and hearing damage from 4 years of sonar headphones. He opened a diner in 1947 called Cookie's Place that served breakfast to dock workers and merchant sailors. The Navy Cross hung behind the counter. Customers asked about it sometimes. Cookie would say he'd served on destroyer escorts and been involved in anti-submarine operations. If they pressed, he'd say he'd done some listening work and changed subject. He never mentioned the 22 U-boats, never mentioned the 2,120 lives saved. Marcus Washington died March 3, 1978, age 62, from lung cancer. His obituary in the Mobile Register mentioned his Navy service and his diner, but made no mention of submarine kills or lives saved. But in the Navy's submarine warfare school, there's a display case. Inside, a bent soup spoon, a photograph of a young black sailor in cook's uniform wearing headphones, 22 German U-boat identification tags recovered from debris fields, and a brass plaque reading, Petty Officer Marcus Cookie Washington, USS Stewart, 1943. Using knowledge gained from 12 years repairing industrial kitchen equipment, Washington identified 22 German U-boats by recognizing machinery sounds other sonar operators dismissed as ocean noise. U-boats destroyed: 22. Enemy casualties: 986. Allied sailors saved: 2,120. Method: listen for broken soup dispensers. That bent soup spoon killed 22 U-boats in 135 days and saved over 2,000 Allied sailors from drowning in the North Atlantic. Sometimes the difference between victory and defeat isn't advanced technology. Sometimes it's one person who understands how machinery fails and has the courage to say, "That's not ocean noise, that's a broken valve," when everyone else thinks he's crazy. Cookie never claimed to be a hero. He just said he'd heard a sound he recognized: a bent spoon, 22 submarines, 2,120 lives. The story the Atlantic remembered.